Welcome to the Regenerative Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Nicole Dooling and Michael Frey, who are the second-generation operators of Mariah Vineyards and the creators of Dirt Wine. Mariah Vineyards is supporting regenerative agriculture as the first land-to-market verified regenerative vineyard in the world, and this couple is working with their family to sell wine under the Mariah Vineyards brand, while also developing a new concept in dirt wine that will be in the market soon. In this episode, we learn about the history of this family-run mountaintop vineyard. We take a deep dive into their transition to regenerative agriculture. Plus, Nicole and Michael spend time educating us on the current under-discussed issues in the wine industry, like shallow sustainability certifications, the use of over 70 additives in wine, and more. There is a ton of great information in this one, and it was super educational for Kyle and I to take our first deep dive into wine. We hope you enjoy it and learn as much as we did. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Super fired up today to have our friends Nicole and Michael from Mariah Vineyards and Dirt Wine with us. So welcome, y'all.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no sweat. We're super excited to have you. This is our first episode with wine, which we've never done before.
Let's go.
I also, as I just told Nicole and Michael a moment ago, I've also never had a glass of wine in my life. That doesn't mean I'm not interested in this. I think that, wine is a unique opportunity to discuss flavor profiles and depth of flavor and how soil can affect that is really, really interesting. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that industry to lead the way in the regenerative movement, just because it's such a complicated, group of consumers who are looking for very specific things, right? So for those who are unfamiliar with the brand, and I know that there's like a couple of different levels of brand here, give us a quick lay of the land of what Mariah Vineyards produces and what Dirt produces here and now, just so our consumers can understand, who we're talking to.
Okay, so Mariah Vineyards is a vineyard up in Mendocino County in the Mendocino Ridge AVA that my parents founded in 1979. And planted, originally Zinfandel. Then for many, many years, they sold fruit to multiple different wineries. And eventually in around 2006, 2007, they started making their own wine from that brand.
Is that still Zinfandel today, or are there other varieties?
There's a lot of different things today. We have, we can get into the story of Mariah, but basically, that is the vineyard that my parents started from the ground up, literally. There's nothing on this mountaintop. It's at 2,400 feet.
Wow.
But to make that clear, it's surrounded by forest. It's on a spring. It's on solar, so it's completely off the grid. It's for me as a Swiss, it's absolutely insane that goes up on this rooftop and builds a vineyard. It's absolutely impressive.
Yeah. My dad was very, his passion, he wanted to plant a mountain vineyard. And he found one way out there, or he found land way out there and planted it. Yeah. That's where I grew up. And let me tell you, when you're a kid, it's really great. And then when you're a teenager, you're like, this sucks because I live really far from everything. And an hour to school, it was really far. We had a generator when I was younger. We have had solar for a long time now. So, you get home from school and, there's no TV to turn on because the generator's not on. So looking back, I appreciate all these things. But as a kid, you were like, wow, I'm very different than everybody else,
Living in the boonies.
For those that aren't familiar with, California geography, Nicole, what's the nearest city, or put it into perspective for some folks?
Okay, yeah. So Mendocino County is north of Sonoma County, which is even more, so it's, San Francisco, Marin, Sonoma County, and then Mendocino County. So it's about 3 hours north of San Francisco. Here in the Mendocino Ridge AVA, in the vineyard world, there's things called AVAs, American Viticultural Areas. And my dad and a couple other growers up in the ridgetop started the AVA of Mendocino Ridge.
Wow.
A lot, 20 something years ago now. And it's the only non-contiguous AVA in the country. So basically the
it starts at 1,200 feet.
It's only the ridge tops at 1,200 feet and above in this like one coastal ridge section of Mendocino County. So it's very, very specific. It has a handful of vineyards and up there. It's really unique. All mountain vineyards. And our vineyard is at 2,400 feet. Dry farmed. And yeah, we can get into the farming more, but sorry, that was a long explanation of Mariah Vineyards, but it's family, and it's my dad's been farming it, and my parents have been running it and farming it for like all of it, everything.
Yeah.
For the consumer side, we are producing Pinot Noir, we are producing Pinot Noir. We have several clones of Pinot Noir. We have several clones of Chardonnay. We produce a Primitivo, a Rosé under the brand Mariah. And Dirt is a project of Nicole and I. It's not a wine yet. It's still in process, but it's more a path that we try to go on to create transparency in the wine industry. There's a lot of stuff that we learned during our grower career and our experience out of the wine industry that we think is a disservice for consumers. So I think it's time that somebody is speaking up and disrupts a little bit. So
yeah, we're definitely going to dive into that. And I think knowing a little bit about y'all's backstory, you know, we break it up into like 3 or 4 parts, right? So there's like how it all started, and then being a pure grower that sold most of the fruit to other winemakers, then kind of bringing the winemaking in house, having your own brand, and then this like regenerative transition, and now this like future vision for Dirt. So let's take those in chunks, right? Let's go all the way back, like Nicole's kind of alluded to her parents getting it started, and just how did this all come about? And then, you know, get us rolling there, Nicole.
Okay. So my parents, Dan and Vicky, they looked for property for years and ended up finding this mountaintop property. It's about 90 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Currently it is about 30 acres of vineyard, 30 acres of what we call the backfield, which has kind of been my little regenerative playground, which we'll talk about that later.
Nice.
Really cool stuff. And then there's about 30 acres of forest surrounding it. So literally you take a drone up and you look around, and I mean, it just is literally on the top of this mountain, and everything kind of falls around it. So the way the crow flies, it's about 4 or 5 miles to the ocean.
Okay.
Small town, Point Arenas in Manchester is down the road, and then Anderson Valley the other way, which is a big
Pinot
wine region. Yeah, it's very well known for Pinot, but valley floor kind of vineyards down in there, maybe up into the mountains a little bit. But so, and as I mentioned, the Mendocino Ridge AVA is a pretty unique AVA based on elevation. And I'm not going to get too detailed into it, but elevation has a lot to do with the acidity in fruit. It's just different growing region completely.
It's also different. It's also different for farming because you're really exposed and you have over 100 inches of rain and quite severe storms. So
we get snow, and this year we got quite a bit of snow, but we get snow at times. We're at 24 feet. And my dad's dream was to have, you know, this mountaintop vineyard, and my mom is very much involved. They planted it in 1980, I think was the first actual planting, and it was Zinfandel, originally Zinfandel. A long time ago, a lot of Italians went up to this region and they planted Zinfandel because you plant what makes sense. And Zinfandel did well in that region. They planted that. Hard labor. They lived in a tent for a little while. Then they moved into this old sheep shack that was like on the property. Wow. And they lived in a tiny little cabin. There's a lot of old pictures on our website. Actually, you can check them out. But they lived in this old little cabin for like 3 years. I mean, they had an ice chest and then a freezer in Boonville at their friend's house, and they
Wow.
just, I mean,
It's a true labor of love.
nowadays
You don't do this unless you really care about making wine.
Yeah, building a vineyard. I mean, it takes, oftentimes about 3 years until you get your first crop. So their first crop, which I'm going to age myself here, but their first crop was 1983, the year I was born, and they had their first harvest. They sold, I think all the fruit went to Kendall Jackson, KJ at the time. And since then they've been basically growing a vineyard, and then they also 4 kids were raised up on this tiny mountaintop. My mom was, working in the vineyard and dealing with taking us all to school, taking care of us. It was very family run.
Yeah. Pretty insane.
Still is.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, they sold most of their fruit to Kendall Jackson and then Fetzer and some other kind of bigger wineries. And then I don't know the exact year, but at one point they ended up having this great contract with Brown-Forman, who ended up taking all of the Zinfandel, and they made a high-end brand out of Mariah, and they made a Mariah wine. It was the first time really
Can
Mariah
I ask
wine
why the name Mariah became? I think I have a sister whose name is Mariah, and it's a very rare name.
Oh, wow.
So just curious where that came from. Yeah, gotta give her a shout out.
Well, yes. My dad, which he would be a great guy to have on a podcast, but he is very. He, I guess, sat in this movie theater a long time ago and watched this movie called Paint Your Wagon, which I'm sure none of us have. I mean, I haven't even seen the whole movie. But
Paint Your Wagon?
Paint Your Wagon.
Okay.
I mean, my dad loves these old movies. I mean, he was like, so Bonanza, MASH, like all this stuff was like his jam. But he, Paint Your Wagon. And there's it's a musical, I think. And there's a part of it, and there's a song called They Call the Wind Mariah. And apparently he sat in this movie theater. I mean, his stories change all the time, but like he sat in this movie theater and he was already looking for, wanted a mountain vineyard. He went to all these schools and ended up studying viticulture and was looking for a vineyard. And he decided, I'm going to call my mountain vineyard Mariah, because of this song.
They call the wind Mariah, and because we are on a mountaintop, we have constant wind, so it makes sense. Yeah.
So that's the name. And then when they went into this contract for quite a few years, which as a grower and as a farmer, that is awesome, because it's really, really hard, as I'm sure from being in this regenerative space. Like, farmers are really the bottom of the whole food chain. And so to have a contract where you have the option that you can sell your product, and aside from weather, different things, different tonnages, every year is very different. It's a very vintage situation where every year weather really matters. And it was a great safety net, a really good contract for them. So anyway, they made a high-end brand.
It was awesome. Brown-Forman is Jack Daniels, and they really put the Mariah brand on the map. So there was a lot of energy and power in the back. They made beautiful wooden cases. They had etched glass, and they sold the Mariah wine to high-end restaurants. So for Mariah, it was an absolutely blessing. Yeah.
And for Mendocino Ridge AVA, which they allude to as oftentimes as islands in the sky, because these mountain tops come up and the fog comes in underneath into the.
What a cool visual! That's really cool.
Yeah, I just think it's important to highlight what y'all just said around what did we just talk about there? We talked about the theme of Brown-Forman is a huge brand, right? And so we tend to focus on smaller or medium-sized brands, but the brand interacts with the consumers and creates the market and helps the farmer drive profitability. which is the whole point of this podcast. And I think the work we're trying to do is evangelize about the fact that to support growers, we have to support the brands. And there's this awesome symbiotic relationship between those two and all those things that you just kind of mentioned, both of you. And so I just want to highlight that because that's the whole purpose of what we're trying to talk about. And that's going to shift with what y'all are doing in terms of how the brand is interacting with your own brand or not or whatever. But that's the whole point, right?
It's I think a specialty of the wine industry. I know I shift the topic a little bit, but is appellations. So I think there's Napa as an appellation that's premium. Then there's Sonoma, and then there's the other appellations. And we are getting paid depending on where we grow our grape. So it is, it doesn't. We don't get a premium for organic fruit. We don't get a premium for something else. So it's really, really dependent
like on a class system.
It's really dependent on appellation. Right. So if we speak about brands and support, the important part for growers is always how do we get a premium for good work? So if we generate, if we elevate our fruit, if we have the cleanest, nature positive fruit, how do we get a premium out of that?
That is fascinating, and it makes so much sense. It's just something I never really thought about. And again, like my level of ignorance on this call, and even for our listeners, like I am for sure the least educated person in the room when we talk about wine. 100%. Nicole has already corrected me subtly once when I mentioned, people who make wine, and she's like, no, starting a vineyard. And there's a difference there. And that's one of the things I want to kind of hone in on a little bit is my assumption as a very ignorant non-wine consumer is that most wines are growing their own grapes. And I'm feeling and learning that is not even close to being true. So I'd be curious to know from your perspective, how and you can ballpark these figures. I don't expect anybody to know this off the top of their head, but for the wine industry, how many of the brands are actually growing their own grapes, are vertically integrated in that way? If you were to guess, is it 50%? Is it 70%? Is it 20%? What's your take on that?
I think it really depends. So it really depends where you are. So in Europe, it's more the vigneron style where the farmer is also the winemaker. In the States, it's really hard to put a figure in, but I think you will find barely somebody that farms his own fruit and produces the wine. It's a really high figure of wineries that purchase fruit without farming them. And then when you want to grow a brand, right, you also have to purchase fruit, So a winery reaching a point where they can produce certain cases from their property and then they purchase the rest. So it's a mix.
They buy fruit, yeah.
But the percentage is really high that you have.
But it becomes important when we talk about the price you get paid is not necessarily based on the quality, it's based on the region. So, there's a finite amount of land in Napa or a finite amount of land in Sonoma. So regardless of how great your practices are or the quality of your grapes, if you're not in that region, that appellation, like you mentioned, there's not really a lot you can do. And it feels like if I'm reading the writing on the wall, that's what Dirt is trying to solve for. Is that correct?
It's everything turns around supply and demand, right? So so it's really difficult to break out the appellation system, but it's possible. That's why we went down the path of a land to market verification, because it allowed us to build climate resilience on one side. And we really, that in the wine industry, it's, if you look back at last year and the rain that we have, climate resilience is everything. And then on the second thing, it was, for the business side, it allowed us to differentiate our fruit out of this ocean of wine.
Yeah.
So and then you can break out. But it's difficult.
On the tail end of that, I think this is something important for consumers to know and understand in the wine industry, because it's really gray area. Like you buy a bottle of wine from let's just say it doesn't matter where it is, but you buy a bottle of wine from, let's say a winery in Napa somewhere, right? But maybe they have a vineyard, maybe they don't, right? You have to really look at the bottle, and you can look at a bottle and if it's a single vineyard designate is where it'll say the name of the vineyard on the bottle. You know that I think it's around that, like pretty much all of the fruit in that bottle was made from wine from that specific vineyard.
Wow.
Many wines
100%.
out there, you will not see a single vineyard designate, right? So that is one way. And some consumers and, wine geeks there, like, of course they know these things, right? And they look for appellations like Carneros and all these things. But the general people, like a lot of people in our generation don't know. I mean, I had a friend at work tell me about this natural wine from Mount Shasta. And I was like, where did the fruit come from? And he's like, Shasta, of course. And I was like, I don't think they're growing grapes on Mount Shasta. But I don't know, maybe. And I look at it and you look at the bag and like, maybe you'll see where the fruit is from. But like, if there's no vineyard name on there, it could be from anywhere.
It's also how you grow a brand in Napa, right? So you don't have enough fruit in Napa, so you can purchase from other AVAs and then produce a wine, and it's your brand from Napa with fruit that has never seen the Napa, for example. That exists, right? But
it's a lot of things that are frustrating in the wine world, but it's also, there's a lot of room to really find those little guys that are really doing it and farming, and they're putting their fruit in, most of Mariah fruit goes into single vineyard designated wines because it's unique fruit. It's mountain fruit. People appreciate the quality of it, and they don't want to blend it away into how many other millions of gallons of wine that they're making. So sorry.
It's important for me. I want that we don't sound frustrated. It's not a frustration. It's just how the industry is, right? Yeah. And there's space for disruption. And I think it's a disservice for consumers. So consumers should demand more. So they should ask more. They ask a lot of questions when they buy a vegetable or another brand in the store, but they don't ask a lot of questions when they pick a wine, and they should.
Yeah. And if we can't get people to buy regenerative wine, then I'm not super hopeful that we'll get them to buy regenerative other things, because that should be the consumer that should really care, right? And so there's the individual like responsibility and education piece, but there's also like the calling out some of the, I don't want to call it greenwashing, or just the marketing tactics, right? And what y'all were referring to in some other CPG categories, they call that mass balancing, right? So they get the majority of the ingredient that's fair trade, and then they mix in some other non-fair trade, but it's fair trade enough to claim fair trade, or in this case, it'd be from Sonoma or Napa or whatever, which I think is important. But let's go back to the story real quick, just to get everyone up to speed on. We have the deal with Brown-Forman. That's going well. There's a change, right? So bring us from the change that happens there till now, and then let's talk about kind of this regen transition and why that happened.
So then he gets the contract was up, and he got his brand back. He got his name back. They gave it back to him, which was also lucky.
That's amazing.
And then they decided to start making some of their own Mariah wines they have a bonded winery on site at Mariah. It's small, but and then my mom just used some consulting winemakers and learned to be a winemaker after like raising 4
Nicole,
kids up there.
What does that mean when you have your own winery? Like I imagine like the movies, like people stomping grapes with their feet. Like, is that one piece of equipment? Is this 10 people? Like what does that actually entail? Right.
So there's so many different sizes of wineries. And I mean, there's big, huge mass producing wineries. Yeah. And there's a lot of we are going deep in the wine world, but like there's custom crush facilities, and where you can not have a vineyard, not have a winery, and be a winemaker, or hire a winemaker. You can just be a normal person out there and decide, I want to make my own wine. It costs you a lot of money because you got to buy fruit, you got to buy or work in a custom crush, you got to find a winemaker, and then you got to do all the bottling and all that stuff. So there's these custom crush facilities all over the place, and you can have your fruit from wherever you decide to buy it trucked in, have a winemaker make it, and it comes out the other end, and you put your label on the bottle.
So you guys can produce your region brands.
Yeah, you could. Anybody can do that.
Wild.
The bonded winery, the bonded is like the legal winery, is that custom crush facility, and they hold like the legal. I don't know the details about that, but we have a very small winery, and yes, you can stomp on the grapes if you want. But there is.
It's like in the beer industry, right?
Yeah.
You can brew at home in a bathtub, and then you can produce millions of gallons, and it's exactly the same in the wine industry.
Yeah.
So we do have a small. We converted basically our cellar into.
It's a winery.
It was built into the house to be. It's our bonded. It is the winery, and we have a destemmer. We have a press that kind of sucks, but we didn't do one. And you can press the food at other winery. There's ways that you can work with better equipment, but it's a small winery, and because we are primarily viticulturists and growers, so only a couple of tons a year go into our brand.
But that's why we produce our wines not at Mariah. We produce our wines that you can buy on our website in a big professional winery with a professional winemaker and stuff, that we have consistency and can provide high quality. So, but the Mariah brand exists mostly because it's really easy to start a conversation around regenerative agriculture when you pop a bottle, and it's really difficult when you otherwise start to do that. But I'm shifting away from the call line.
So my mom started making wine, and she made the wine in the winery using some help from consultants, and has learned basically. She's made Sauvignon Blanc Chardonnay, and Primitivo, which is Zinfandel, and she's made Pinot, but she doesn't like making Pinot. Pinot is a really rough, hard grape, just sensitive. And she was doing that for a long time, and kind of her things that mattered to her were shifting a little bit, and they were basically doing everything. And they don't have a marketing person, they don't have a distributor. It's very small. We don't have a fancy tasting room with chandeliers and all this. It's not like it's just them doing everything. And before I ended up going into nursing.
No, it's important.
Yeah. And before I went into nursing, I helped try to get their wine out a little bit. But that's we only make a little bit. So shift now to, 2018, 17, 18. And I met this guy in Peru.
The crazy Swiss guy shows up and just throws a wrench in everything, huh?
Hey, rescue. I'm a rescue.
It's a rescue. So I was traveling in Peru with my mom, actually. And this guy was on a around the world trip, and I was taking a trip before I was deciding to shift gears in nursing, and then met him. And then he came to California, and hearing about where I grew up in the vineyard, he was like, "Where is this like podunk plate? What are we doing?" Yeah. He goes up there and he's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!"
It's a diamond. It's just Mariah Vineyards is beautiful.
So, kind of fast forward, he was hanging here in the States for a little while, but couldn't work, immigration stuff. And he helped my dad, and really kind of fell in love a little bit with farming, and my dad fell in love with him. My dad is like, if you don't marry this guy, I'm going to. Like, he loved him. and so then, and he's like the one person that my dad will let like run equipment in his vineyard, which is there's nobody that gets to.
But then we got inspired. We got inspired by farming. Farming is just cool. Yeah. It is just to farm a property is extremely fulfilling.
To see how he looks at how, like, when he came to the vineyard, and looked around, it kind of, I mean, I had gone away to college and then like been working as a nurse, you know, I went home and it was home to me. But to see how he looked at this place, I had like this completely new perspective on my parents did a lot. Like I can't even, you know, what they built up there and how truly unique it is. And that even the other day I had a conversation with my dad. I was like, nobody farms their own land anymore. Nobody does, let alone make their own fruit and farm their own land. And so I realized, you know, how unique what they're doing up there really is. And how he looked at the place really shifted my perspective.
And then we had so it was both. So it was this fulfilling experience to farm and to be in pain and hurt and in the sun, just awesome, and to break down and to just awesome. And then we had a lunch that with Paul Dooling that actually changed our life. Paul Dooling was president of Fetzer for a long time, was sitting the president of Demeter and stuff, and is a pioneer in regenerative agriculture. And he brought the word regenerative agriculture up the first time during this lunch. And for us, it was like...
He was also, Paul was very integral in organic viticulture years ago. And he was very, very closely also with Alan York, which if you watch The Beer's Little Farm, you know who that guy is. He's the mastermind behind the farming. And sorry.
No, I didn't know.
And then Paul is sitting on the board of ROC. So he is...
Say that. Yeah.
And for us, it was an epiphany. It's probably like for you guys. Why is not everybody farming in this way?
So,
you know.
So Paul told us, just to back up, Paul told us, he was like, you guys got to go to this summit. There's this Regenerative Earth Summit in Boulder. This is like 2000. And he was like, you got to go. And we were like, what's regenerative? Like, what is this? And we look it up. We're like, this looks kind of cool. And so we're like, let's just go. And so we go, and that was literally like the beginning of our like regenerative rabbit hole, I guess I should say. But it was really what sparked us and inspired us. So that was
two comments and one question. First comment, I feel like we give a lot of love to direct to consumer, like ranchers or market gardeners. And we're like, oh, these people are like working so hard to feed us. And like when you think of wine, you're like, oh, these people must be like super rich. They're rolling in the dough. And it's like, nah, like it's the same thing in these other commodities too. Like you guys are working your asses off. So just observation there, and just like something that my like frame of mind has changed there. Secondly, shout out Celine and Regenerative Rising for putting on the Regenerative Earth Summit. They're coming back this year. We'll link that into the show notes. Question is, you know, what kind of regenerative practices, or like where was your dad at this time when he was getting exposed to these ideas? Was he like hyper conventional? Was he regen curious? Was he already doing some of the practices? Like what was the stage at that time?
So he was dry farming and permanent cover. And then Michael and I, fall of 2019, go to Boulder, and, you know, we were halfway, you know, kind of like...
We have to speak more about Boulder because we slept in the same hotel like Will Harris, so we had the possibility to catch our... It was just my...
Well,
Will, so Bill,
so basically we go to this kind of thing. And then we, you know, we were kind of like, wow, we found our people and we didn't even know about this, you know? And also... like, why isn't everybody farming like this? And the cool thing about that summit was that there was like a doctor there. There was people talking. I mean, it was such a diverse group of people. It wasn't farmers. But yes, Harris was there. And we ended up hanging out with Will and, you know, drinking wine with him late at night in like our hotel lobby. And he's just a unique guy. And he was telling us, I mean, he's a farmer. I remember the beginning of the summit, we had to like do this little exercise where you had to kind of break the ice kind of thing. You had to sit up from your table and move somewhere else, and like you had to stare at somebody for way too long.
1 minute. It was to experience that you're uncomfortable.
So
just you know to break through this wall that everybody feels uncomfortable. Just go out and speak with somebody, and Nicole choose Will.
So I look around the room, and the only there's definitely a couple of farmers in the room, and then I see Will Harris. I mean, dressed to the nines with his like nice, nice leather handmade vest, just cowboy hat, like whole thing, but dressed really nice. And my dad does that. When he goes out, he doesn't wear his Ben Davis and his Carhartt, jacket. He dresses up. And I was like, this guy is a farmer. And I looked at his hands and I was like, he's absolutely a farmer. And so I beeline it for this. I don't know who he was, I was like, not. And so then I had to go stare at Will Harris for like 3 minutes awkwardly. Since then. And then the whole time he's like, you got to talk with these savory folks. Like they're in Northern California. So it kind of instigated this. We met, Phil from Mad Ag. We met all these awesome folks. Yeah. And we're just so energized. So we come back to California and, immediately we like go to the vineyard and we're just like, we got to do this. We got to do this. And my mom was like, yeah, I've been saying this for years. Like, she's got her fingers on the pulse of that property. She's one. She farms like barefoot usually because it was so dusty a long time ago. And my dad was kind of like, what do I have to do differently? Like, tell me what I got to do. And so we started a conversation with the Northern California Savory Hub. It was called the Boston Center for Holistic Management at the time. It's a different name now. It's the Hub now. But it's basically the only California, I'm not going to go into the details of how the Savory Network works, but it's the Savory Institute, and then they work these outsourced hubs around the world. Yeah. And so our local hub, so we started conversations with Land to Market and the Savory Institute and our hub. And we ended up, when I drove down and they were at a summit together, and we went and met with all of them. We met Alan Savory, and we just, we were like, why isn't existing in cropping systems? Like, why is it only on rangeland or for animals? Or there's so much cropping systems that can farm regeneratively, and they just hadn't really kicked into that super well. And so, long story short, we became the pilot at least for vineyards, which is a perennial cropping system. Is very different than like open grassland. But at the end of the day, it kind of just is open grassland underneath your vines. So we started that conversation and did our baseline. Then COVID hit, and we did our baseline early summer of 2020. And then, so our EOV baseline, ecological outcome verification baseline. And then 1 year later, and then every year you do these assessments. Which we were really intrigued. I come back to your question about the farming practices, but we were really intrigued by the outcome base of it. Right. That it's not tracking processes like all the other certifications, and you have to do that and that, because I believe that I farm completely different our vineyard with 100 inches of rain than another vineyard that is down in Paso Robles. So it's really hard to say that's the practice that you have to use. Right. So, it's contextual. It's all contextual. So we were really intrigued with that, also to prove that you actually regenerate, because everybody is claiming regeneration now, but somehow you have to bring some meat on the bone, to make a difference. The vineyard was farmed in a really good way. We were cultivating underneath the wine row before we started. But he had bought an undercutter. So
that just for people that don't know what that means, and I want to understand, that means you're growing things that aren't the grapes on the floor of the vineyard, right?
So vineyards have what everybody calls it usually cover crop, right? So, and you guys probably know that from other systems. And then what's called permanent cover is where you don't disc in your cover crop. So some vineyards do alternating rows every year. They disc one every other row. Right. And then the next year they disc every other row. My dad did that for a while. And then he told me, he was like, I was out there with the disc and I get out of the tractor and he's like, there's just worms. They're just everywhere, Yeah. It's like, why am I disking this up? They should be underground. He went to permanent cover where he didn't disc anymore.
So no-till, basically.
So no-till.
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 Right.
But there's a distinction. There's
years before.
There's a
20 years
distinction.
ago?
There's a distinction because you have the wines and you cultivate underneath to get rid of weeds. That's what every vineyard is doing. Some do it mechanically. Some spray chemicals on it to kill it. That depends how you believe how to farm. So most 99 or more vineyards are cultivating, have bare ground underneath the vine row, and then between the vines they have cover.
Yeah, and sometimes it's anytime you see bare soil, it's bad. You know that from regeneration, or it's not good, right? So when you, as a consumer, if you go to a vineyard and you see if you see bare soil anywhere, you should ask, why is that bare? First off. And secondly, how is it bare? Like, are they disking, which we all know the good and bad of disking, or are they sitting on a four-wheeler and spraying out glyphosate?
It's extremely common. It's extremely common to spray Roundup and glyphosate in vineyards.
So the vine row management is a big deal in viticulture, and it still is. So, but he basically was permanent cover, but he was keeping his vine row cultivated. But he had bought this thing called an undercutter, which basically cuts under. Yeah, we did that on the way, and it basically cuts the roots, but it lays it over as a mulch, so it covers the soil. Yeah. And then after that, during our biggest thing was stopping cultivating the vine row.
I can tell you what we did. So we stopped cultivating underneath the vine row. So we have 100% cover now, right? Yeah. That's
Michael, explain what cultivating means, because I'm lost, right? So I'm thinking of a vineyard. You have rows of the plants, and then like there's usually something that they grow up on, like wood, right? Or like cultivating just means the wine's growing on that plant.
So you have a garden and you plant carrots or whatever you plant, and then you have a surrounding soil around the stuff that you wanna grow, right? And you have to go in there and you have to cultivate it and take the weeds out. That it's not a competition. That it's not a competition for what you want to grow. But we are speaking about 40-year-old wines, dry farmed, where the roots probably go down to I don't know where. So just to think that a little wheat is competition for this wine. No, that's
because they're perennials. They're perennials, right? You plant them and then they stay there.
I will say that was one of our, so my dad was, dry farming, permanent cover. Solar,
we were.
Yeah, he's got diesel tractors because you got to pull stuff. Electric tractors don't have they don't have power or the battery issues right now. There's a lot of side note, but the point is that our biggest conversation that we had, we have a lot of the generational shifts are big, but the biggest discussion and our biggest change was integrating animals into our vineyard system and our vine row management. So our vine row management went from doing an undercutter, which was our easing into this, because my dad has an old school way of thinking and what he was taught.
Way too much, yeah.
And I kind of used it against him at the end of the day, because he was telling me that he doesn't want the grass cover competing with moisture in the soil for his dry farmed vines. And I said, Dad, do you think that this much, the first 6 inches of the topsoil is really, you told me your vine roots are on their way to China. They're so deep, we are different sections here. And so he eventually kind of he talks all about that school of thought, keeping your ground covered is holding more water in your soil rather than letting it go. It keeps your soil cooler, all these things. So we ended up going down this route of, he sold the undercutter and then ended up getting an undervine mower, which is, we have this Clemens that basically goes down and it mows the grass and kicks around each vine. And so it allows us to keep the grass low, because you want to keep it low for frost issues, as well as any migration of insects into your canopy once your canopy is big. So you do need to have some level of management under your vine row. Yeah. And we don't want to cultivate, and we obviously don't want to spray chemicals. So the best way to do it is that, and you can't have sheep in your vineyard too late into the season, because then they'll eat your crop. So your best way to do it is, at this time, mowing is our best way. That was our biggest transition, which was a $34,000 implement. It's really expensive, but it's the long-term perspective.
Quite a mower.
But we did the things that, it's all about diversity, right? I'm a strong believer that everything is about biodiversity first. So we increase biodiversity
in our cover crop mix.
in our cover crops, in the vineyard, in pollinator habitat and stuff. So just what you do when you regenerate land, we pretty much did, yeah.
But the great thing is that we went from him cultivating it to us just mowing. I mean, that was really, really huge. That's, you add up all those vine rows together, that's a lot of surface area.
I think the biggest change is there's a picture in a farmer's mind how his property has to look.
Yeah, right.
So it has to be maintained, it has to be clean, it has to be good, right? And now we think about nature positive systems, and nature positive or nature doesn't look like a golf course. So you have this, my vineyard has to look like that, and on the other side you have, but nature doesn't look exactly like that. So how do we find the middle ground?
So when you're talking about the like mowing between the rows, and my city brain thinks about like my parents' lawn growing up, and I'm assuming that's not what this is like. So what is it that you're growing in this cover crop mix? When do the sheep graze? When do you need to start mowing? What you mentioned biodiversity, like is it multi-grass species together? Like what does all that look like?
Do you want to answer?
You plant different legumes to fix nitrogen.
We've got clover.
We have several species of clover, crimson clover, rose clover, and stuff.
They all mixed together, like growing side by side, or is it like legumes in one row, the next row is clover?
No, it's beautiful. It's
all intermixed.
We have radish in there. We have perennials in there. We have orchard grass that is popping up all over the place this year somehow. So it's the more diverse above ground, the more diverse below ground, we believe. Right. So the more species that we have in there, the better, I think.
Yeah, and each cover crop species or different does different things for the soil and ultimately for the plant. So this year we're actually doing some pretty cool stuff. We're going to work with AEA, Advancing Eco Agriculture. John Kemp. He's super, super interesting guy. We are going to do some sap analysis. So we've done soil testing, and the great thing about the sap analysis is it's kind of similar to a blood draw. You're looking at what is the plant using, uptaking, what's in your soil, what's available to it, how much life is in your soil, all these things. But like, what is the plant is actually using?
Right.
And then you can kind of help the plant better get calcium or manganese, whatever it needs, and you can photosynthesize to its maximum potential, which then allows, it's kind of the same idea. You guys appreciate health and humanity and everything. Yeah. And, your body functions at an optimal level when you can optimize things and you feed yourself well, and when you're balanced and you're healthy. And then once you feel good because of all those things, then maybe you think about running a marathon or whatever it is you want to do. Right. So the whole idea about allowing your plants to be as healthy as they can be, they've got immunity to a lot of things if you can allow them to be healthy. And then once they're immune to things in their own way, they've got major resilience factors that we probably don't even understand all of. And then they can express themselves fully and feel
nutrient
great.
Density.
And then they can put out all these amazing things that we as humans look for in plants to help our own health, right? So then they can start making all these other compounds like resveratrol and phenolics and all this stuff that we're looking for in the actual product. So when you can optimize the functioning of your plants and your soil, then you can really help uplift. And I mean, eventually, if you're healthy enough, you don't have to spray out anything to kill something because the plant can handle it. And
Right.
biodiversity is obviously resilience in many ways, right? So that's kind of our focus, is more of like looking at it as more of like a whole ecosystem.
There were two things that I really liked in the last 3 months. We were at the class with Nicole Masters. What really stuck in my brain is you are what you absorb. You're not what you eat. You are you absorb, and I think that there's a pretty big distinction between that. That's why SAP analysis will show us what is the plant actually absorbing, right? And then the second thing that I thought is interesting, we were at the speech of John Kempf in Napa, and he mentioned that healthy plants build healthy soil, not healthy soil build healthy plants.
Totally.
And I thought that's really interesting, because if a plant is photosynthesizing on a really high level, it feeds the microbes and all the stuff, and that builds healthy soil. So
but the inverse. I want to share something I just learned recently. I just finished this book called The Dorito Effect, which is absolutely phenomenal. Highly recommend it. It talks about the development of plants and nutrient density, all these different things. But in this, they provide this one example, and this kind of stems back to what you mentioned about healthy plants have their own defense mechanisms that we may or may not understand, and they have these secondary compounds. And there was these caterpillars that would decimate these cotton fields. And there's one specific type of wasp that goes out and kills these caterpillars. And they're trying to figure out how the wasp flying over a field of cotton can find the caterpillars. So they do all these experiments. Put a caterpillar and a wasp together to see what's attracting them. The wasp doesn't care about the caterpillar at all. What's happening is when the caterpillar bites a healthy plant, it releases a secondary compound, some sort of an odor that the wasp can pick up on, that attracts the wasp to the area to then kill the caterpillar. And what they realized was when the plants weren't healthy, they weren't emitting enough of that pheromone to attract the predator insects to come kill the bad pest, right? So to your point, like, these plants have these incredible defense mechanisms built into their DNA that they can utilize if they're in the right environment, which is really, really incredible. Part two, that leads me into a question. This book also talks a lot about how the healthiest plants have the best flavor. And I'm wondering, from your perspectives, have you noticed a difference in the quality of your grapes, your wine, since you've started to implement some of these new principles and practices?
Yes. I think the biggest, for me personally, is terroir. In the wine industry, we speak a lot of terroir, right? I think the biggest impact a big impact that you can achieve is if you don't irrigate your fruit, right? So we visited Tapas Creek, for example, once. They had out 2 wines. One was irrigated, one was on a drip. And it was really visible, the drip went down, and the root went down, and then along the drip, and it was really shallow in the topsoil, right? And dry farmed wine went like just 6 feet down. So if you want to express your place, I think dry farming is the way to go.
And just to clarify for any listeners who aren't familiar with the term, dry farming is no added irrigation. You're simply relying on the moisture that comes out of the sky, essentially the natural precipitation in the area.
Yes,
correct. And the great thing about where we are also, I guess I should say more like isolated places of farming, is that, our water comes straight from the sky. It falls on our mountaintop through the soil, and then it goes down, right? So we have, I feel, a responsibility to our, down the mountain members to not put on our ground, to let it go into our river systems, watersheds, as a mountaintop vineyard. And
to not till from an erosion perspective, right?
And like an erosion perspective. So that's huge. This year we got like hammered with so much rain up there. It was a crazy year. Nothing
to complain. Absolutely awesome.
Soaked in beautifully.
The vineyard took it beautifully. We had good infiltration. We actually filled the pond.
And once the
after
water
4 years, so
once the water did run off, I mean, it was crystal clear. There was no dirt in it. It was beautiful.
Incredible.
So that is rain. I mean, we are irrigating with rainwater, and or not irrigating, but our groundwater is being filled with rainwater, right? So we don't have any other farming system around us. We aren't pulling from an aquifer that who knows what is in there because where it come from, and we aren't putting toxic water on our ground, unless the rain is.
We did a chemical test of our water, actually, because we were really interested. So in viticulture, you have to spray, right? You do foliar application, where you put
Sulfur.
Where you put the good stuff on the wine, on the leaves, like you take supplements, and you also spray sulfur. Mildew is a big problem in viticulture. So we really wanted to know, what do we spray on our wines? So we did a chemical analysis, and it was pristine. So,
but when you're irrigating in a
when you think about
you don't know where the water is coming
of what you're doing. Dang it, this delay. When you talked about not tilling before, the soil erosion that Anthony mentioned, the not spraying, like if all those things were happening, which sounds like it's common practice in the wine industry, you also mentioned 3 to 4 miles from the ocean, right? All of that phosphorus, nitrogen, synthetic, everything, glyphosate ends up in the ocean, creating carbon dead zones. Like the positive domino effect of what you're doing is just so impactful. And it's so great that there are people like you leading the way in this industry. And we can share that story. It's just really powerful.
And it's good too, because we don't have any chemical drift, right? So we're farming organically, uncertified at this time. But we don't have, there's nobody next door to us. It's not a neighborhood of farms, so nothing is drifting. No fungicide drift towards us. So we are kind of a little mountain oasis. We're actually working with a local girl to do treatment-free beekeeping up on our property. Super cool. So there's other ways we can expand beyond just the grapes.
Nicole is really pushing innovation. She has a Cairns plot up there too. Treatment-free beekeeping, some low-growing bee flowers, insectary stuff.
So let me do what I often have to do on this podcast, which is take us from agronomy back to commercialization, because we could talk about the agronomy forever, right?
Yes.
But let's go back to Mariah Vineyards as a brand, Dirt Wine as a developing brand. Why the need to brand these products and tell this story that way, what that means, how you're going to do it. Before we recorded, I want to give you all the opportunity to mention some of these additives that are a problem in the wine industry, some of these sustainable certifications, just some of these issues that you're trying to bring to light on the commercial side from the agronomy. So let's do that translation for the audience real quick.
Okay, so we believe that that there has to be transparency out there. If we want to change the food system on a broad scale, there has to be transparency for the consumer. That consumer can actually vote with their dollars in a way that they support the ones that are doing good, right? That's as an intro. For example, in the wine industry, regenerative viticulture or regenerative farming is a buzzword now. It is still not defined what it actually means, so everybody can use it. So how do you separate now the ones that are doing good and the ones that are just using it to market their product?
The same with natural wine. There's no definition of natural wine.
So we're really believing in that we have to create this transparency. Why do we have to create this transparency? A wine industry can use over 70 additives in winemaking. That goes from stuff like you put yeast is an additive, sulfur is an additive, you can sugar, you can acidify wine.
You don't have to tell the consumer on the bottle that you're doing this, right? It can just happen.
No, exactly. So there's still not an ingredient label.
Yeah, do you ever see wine with ingredients?
No.
The only thing that doesn't.
And I say that out of this 70, there's a lot of stuff that is just normal, and then there's other stuff that is egg white, for example, to fine wine.
Sugar.
There's gelatin that is derived from fish bladders, and then it goes to the other side to a product. It's called Velcorin. It's highly lethal in high doses that you can put in, but it transforms in the first 24 hours. And for me, that's just the additive and the ingredient labeling side.
Yeah.
Consumers should demand more.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have some labeling and transparency out there that you know what you drink. Mm-hmm. Then you have sustainable labels that still accept glyphosate spraying and the use of chemicals. Then you have
in the farming,
and then you have the origin of the grapes. You buy a wine that you think is from this region, but the grapes are from the other side of you don't know. So I think if our goal, and it is our goal, to transform viticulture or the food system, then transparency has to be a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and how is Dirt going to take that further than maybe Mariah Vineyards has or can?
Dirt, I do want to say, is rooted. I mean, we believe in Mariah Vineyards. We believe in the farming up there. We are helping farm that vineyard. Mm-hmm. So we believe in the purity of that place and the fruit quality that comes out of there. So Dirt is offshooting out of that.
Yeah, it's an and, not an or.
Yes, exactly. I just wanted to say
but to create transparency, you have to disrupt a little bit too, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And Mariah is my parents-in-law's brand, and I don't want to disturb some stuff under their brand, So it's my face and it's my brand. So that's the goal. Yeah.
And we are. I think that we are figuring out the best way in which we can move forward with Dirt. So it's kind of a stay tuned.
We're growing the grapes currently.
Yeah,
we are growing the grapes currently because it has to be a transparent wine from the soil to the glass. So we are currently in the growing process, and next year in the wine process.
Yeah. Super cool.
Love it.
I'm blown away by the list of additives that you just mentioned. And I love the LOI thing. Like, obviously, I mean, again, I've never purchased a bottle of wine. Actually, I probably have for cooking, but I've never drank one. But everything I buy at the store, I look at the LOI. You look at the list of ingredients, but it's blowing my mind to think that wine consumers who pay these hundreds of dollars to drink, 4 glasses of this thing, they don't even know what's in it. And that is absolutely blowing my mind. And especially like for the vegan community, there could be gelatin from fish or eggs in wine, which is, I'm still like, I'm recovering from having just learned that.
So it's not even, I mean, that's with all, so many different food products, you know, that there's the farming side of, I obviously have things cleanly farmed and not with, toxic biocides, or toxic water for that matter. And then cause that's another whole can of worms of like, okay, you can,
don't go
anyway,
there.
Sorry. That's
don't go
anyway,
there.
But
we are extremely and really deep in that stuff. I'm sorry.
My God. We love it.
Years ago from the same race, he blew my mind talking about that. We had this whole conversation about cancer and interesting things. And then he opened my eyes to the fact that, irrigation water matters, right? And nobody thinks about that. And organic farming, nothing considers where the water is coming from or what when it is being irrigated on your land. And I just want to say that and leave everybody for their own perspective.
That's Kyle, you mentioned you mentioned the additives. That's one part, right? So the other part that I mentioned is the glyphosate use with still to be able to be sustainable certified. And there was a study that tested wines and beers for glyphosate, and you would be really surprised what's in wine from the glyphosate side as well. So
can you
there has to be
give us a little bit more information about that? Like, is it 95% of wines, 70% of wines are?
No, you can't say that in percentage. You would have to buy wines out of a shelf and you would have to test them for glyphosate. That would be an extremely interesting project, actually. Mm-hmm. That would stir up a lot of things. You can Google glyphosate in wine study. It's a US Perk and did one where they bought out beers and wines, and conventional and organic wines had actually glyphosate in it. Low levels, but still. So,
yeah, there's a lot of chemical use in cropping systems, especially because in vineyards you're constantly fighting against or trying to prevent mildew outbreaks.
Yeah,
as well as there's all sorts of other issues that can happen in vineyards. And it's a heavily chemical ridden industry on the farming side. And then obviously, because you don't have to label ingredients, on the wine making side, you can put a lot of stuff in there and fix your wine or make it do different things.
But that brings me back, know your farmer.
Yeah.
So on the wine side, definitely too, and demand more. I really ask questions.
Yeah. And it sounds like we need some government intervention from the FDA and some others to actually get some legislation to protect people, because I don't know if we're going to get all the way there from just consumer demand. I think that can play a role, right? But some of this stuff is big moving stuff.
So the level of transparency can start with a brand. And that's what's so cool about what you're doing with Dirt is you're acknowledging the gap in information for consumers right now, not necessarily by calling out everybody else, but by taking the level of education a step further, right? To acknowledge like this is what we are doing and what we're not doing. And then as a consumer, once you realize like Dirt is doing this, why isn't everybody else? What is it that they're not acknowledging within their practices? So I think, AC, you're spot on that we will need to have legislation to get involved in to some degree, but we can start that movement with a brand trying to do the right thing, which is really cool and really powerful.
It's kind of a proof of concept. It can be done, and it's
well said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know. Any other questions you guys have?
Kyle, future vision question from you, bro.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were going investment way. But yeah, so the future. We mentioned, Mariah is doing what Mariah is doing. Dirt sounds like we're in growing season right now. There could be, wine next year. Walk us through what the future could look like, and it sounded to me like there could be an option for Dirt to be something that isn't necessarily like wine in a bottle. So just walk us through what that vision looks like. And if it is wine in the bottle, are there certain varieties that you're hoping to focus on? And are there certain channels where people could potentially find you? Could they find you online? Like, walk us through that whole process.
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Well, obviously, the high level, Mike.
We're passionate about regenerative viticulture tremendously. So with Mariah, we transformed Mariah to be the first land-to-market verified vineyard out there. These are 90 acres, but 90 acres are not enough, right? So I think with Mariah, we will continue on this path. It's our goal to be a hotspot for innovation. So if guys have technology or new seeds or you name it, reach out to us, and we are happy to test it up on the vineyard.
On a side note, I'm super intrigued with perennial grains. So that's a different conversation. But that's why I have this Cairns test spot. Anyway, side note.
Then that's Mariah, and we're also working with Mariah. I think a powerful path forward is nutrient density study. So we are working there too. We started with Kelly Mulville from Piscinus Ranch some conversations and are looking how can we move forward with that. With Dirt,
we're also working
with Dirt. The vision is to set an antidote into the wine industry, that it's possible. How does that look like? I don't want to speak too much about that so far. but it's a learning out of our last years. It's always, if you can trigger the senses and if you can pop a bottle, you have completely different communications, especially with a product like wine that is so emotional and is, you use wine at weddings and then that social gatherings stuff. It's the perfect product
it brings people together and it starts the conversation.
To really kick a conversation off.
Where you can talk about the wine and the terroir, and then you can flip to, what about the rest of the food on the table? Really like opens, and the idea that dirt is, in an industry that speaks so highly about terroir, but somehow isn't really focused on it is exactly where things are grown, or the transparency of that, calling it dirt is kind of this kind of edgy way to speak about terroir. And then also in regenerative agriculture, nobody says dirt. It's always soil, so this idea to kind of flip it on its edge and just say it's dirt, and everybody knows what dirt is. People, kids know what dirt is, and they're two. A
bit disruption is good for an industry. So
well, everyone keep your eyes and ears peeled, because it sounds like more is coming. And I think part of your answer to this next question is going to be about bringing people together, sparking conversations, and being edgy. That would certainly be part of my answer to this question. But I'm going to wrap us with the question that we asked everybody, which is, how do we get regen brands to have 50% market share by 2050?
There's two paths in my opinion. For me, radical transparency, so even if you pay a premium for farmers, even if you do all that stuff, in the end, consumption drives the market. So you have to create radical transparency that you can vote and align as a consumer with the brands that are doing good.
And health, I think, is the other one.
Health is
because, Maslow's pyramids of need. We're selfish and care about our health before we care about the health of the planet, really. On a broad
100%.
scale. And if you can trigger, health in people, and people understanding that the farming and the processing or the making of food is health. Food is medicine. I'm an ER nurse, and let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff that walks through those doors that does not need to be an emergency. And food as medicine can be a really big driver in this way. And I 100% believe in that. And,
me too.
And I think that triggering that in people is it's innate in all of us, so we just have to find the right way to get to it, and
I think you're spot on.
Those are,
I keep shouting out the Dorito effect, this book, but what's so cool about the Dorito effect is it talks about food as medicine, and also that healthy plants, animals taste better and are better for you. So you get that not only is it, radical transparency, not only is it, food is medicine and health, but it's also that you're not sacrificing the enjoyment of a bottle of wine or the food or the chicken or the tomato or whatever. You're actually improving the quality of what you're consuming from a taste perspective, while at the same time doing right for your body and for the planet. And to me, that's the trifecta. If we can get people to understand those three things, I think that this movement has no ceiling, which is will help us get to that 50% market share by 2050.
And that's why it's great that there's so many people working in so many different areas and spaces, from farming to brands to helping farmers get funding for these kind of transitions. And I think this is a team effort on everybody needs to jump in and work in this direction. And I think you guys are a hub that allows for more communication around the folks that are really working to do this. So keep it up.
We appreciate that. Yeah. Y'all are doing the harder work, so we do the easy stuff.
I know of brands
100%.
because I've listened to your podcast. I went up to Christy from Quinn Snacks and I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, Christy, because I like, you know, I think it's really, really great to like hear the stories behind these brands and the passion behind the people that are fighting really hard. It's not easy as a brand or a farmer. So
yeah, the struggles. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
But when we're open about them and we get to share them together, it makes it a little easier, and hopefully we can solve them together. And that's what it's all about.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thanks for joining us, y'all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.